Welcome
Okay.
to Progress 11, the Progress Tracker, Module 11. Take it away, Tammy.
Okay. So the Progress Tracker is what is in HMIS, and it's the mechanism that allows the CE team to know that you, as a case manager, have initiated the housing process for a client. It tracks the status of your client in the CE process and enhances the coordination and information sharing between staff at other agencies as well as the CE team. It's designed to be visible to all the subcook agencies so that information is visible to all of you. The Progress Tracker is the method to indicate completion of the various parts of the phased assessment. So current guidance from the CE team says that the housing assessment process should begin as soon as clinically appropriate for chronically homeless individuals, TAY, household with minors, and other extremely vulnerable individuals. And we're recommending that you don't start the housing assessment for anyone else until they've done 7 to 14 days of nights of stay or days of service. The rationale for that is we have found over time that approximately 50% of our shelter guests only stay in shelter for 7 days or less. So we're trying to use the CE resources for those folks that, so we assume that the 50% self-resolve and won't need our CE resources. So when you're ready to begin the housing assessment process with your client, there's a couple of things to do as sort of a precursor for that. The first thing to do is to check HMIS to see if your client is already working with another agency. So I'm over here in the test site, and I've got there's a couple of different clients set up here. So let's say right now I'm working with Cranberry Muffin. I'm going to search for my client. I'm going to go to the client profile tab and then scroll down to the entry point progress track assessment, which is this section here. I can see that this client has an open progress tracker. So there's no closed date and no closed reason. So I know that this progress tracker is open. I can click on the pencil here and see what other agency is working with this client. So I'm scrolling up, and this is the top of the progress tracker, and I can see that this client is also working with Jane Smith at Housing Forward. So before I proceed to have further discussions with this client, I should contact the caseworker at Housing Forward and have a discussion on who's going to remain the primary contact with this client. It's possible that they've lost contact with that Housing Forward case manager has lost contact with that client, and now the client's showing up at your agency. In that case, with agreement, you would put your agency in as the sending agency, yourself as the case manager, and then you can put Housing Forward in this section with to indicate that they've also been working with Housing Forward as a second agency. If the first sending agency thinks that they're going to remain the primary contact, then you should offer to help in any way possible and stay in contact with them. So if you've determined that your client is not working with any other agency, either the progress tracker is closed or there isn't one, then you can continue on with the housing assessment. In that case, you have a discussion on the client's, you verify that the client is still literally homeless, that they have an interest in housing, and then you have the housing discussion. And you would enter the outcome of the discussion on the client profile tab under the housing interest VI SPDAT status. So here's where you can say that the client is not interested in housing. You would put in the date that you had the discussion with the client, the agency, what part of the organization you're with, your name, and the outcome. And you can say that the client's not interested at this time. Now, the expectation is that you would continue to have those conversations, and that at least within 30 days, you would try to have that conversation again. If the client is now interested, you would come back and put an end date on this record, and then add a second record with the new outcome. It's possible that the client is still not interested, but we would want to know that you at least tried and had that conversation with the client. Could be that the client now is interested, and then you're going to continue with CE consent and proceed with the VI SPDAT. Okay. So assuming that your client is interested in housing, now you're going to continue with the CE consent and the VI SPDAT. There is a paper form for the CE consent. You can do the VI SPDAT on paper or directly in HMIS. So once you do that, here again on the client, we're still on the client summary screen up here. You will indicate that you've received, that you have CE consent. Yes or no here, should be yes. And then you'd enter the VI SPDAT based on the VI SPDAT that you did for the client, either the family, TAY, or individual. One other thing that's important for the CE process is some clients are locked down. Oh, I'm sorry. When you enter the VI SPDAT and put this in HMIS, this section needs to be unlocked to the Alliance so that the CE team, if necessary, can look at this. So you go to this lock here, click that lock, select future and historical answers, add visibility group, and search for Alliance projects. It's number 601, Alliance projects. You click the green star, the green plus, and that adds that visibility group. So this VI SPDAT is not going to be visible to all other agencies in the Alliance, just to the CE team and the folks at the Alliance. You've also received consent, so that needs to be uploaded to the HMIS record as well and unlocked. The documentation pieces get uploaded under the client profile. You scroll down to file attachments. We'd add a new file attachment, search your computer for where you have that consent loaded or saved. Select your document, give it a name. We ask that all CE documentation be prefaced with CE. I'll upload that. And again, each document is also locked. So that lock will need to be unlocked as well. Click the lock. Again, we're unlocking this to Alliance projects. 601, and exit. And now this lock changes to an open lock. So the progress tracker is designed to share information between the various subcook agencies. Some clients may have been locked for legitimate reasons. They denied sharing. It's a client that's fleeing DV. But when that happens, the CE team and other agencies can't see their progress tracker. So you need to check and see the status of your client. Some agencies lock by default, and if there's not a legitimate reason, we ask that those clients be unlocked. So we're not asking you to unlock records that should be locked, just to double check that if those that can be unlocked, then they should be. This client, my brand muffin, is locked. You can see the lock up here in the corner. And to unlock, again, click the lock. And in this case, we're going to unlock based on the HMIS consent that the client signed. So if the client signed Profile or Profile Plus, we unlock to Regional Global and click that plus. If the client has, well, I can do this. You can also get rid of this. If the client has denied sharing, we still want this to be open to Alliance projects. And now again, the lock changes up here. If you go in and you look at the lock and it says restricted, which sometimes it does, then you should submit a KZoo ticket to the HMIS team and have them work it out and get the visibility corrected. So at this point, you've checked to see the progress tracker does not exist, that no one else is working with this client. The client has expressed an interest in pursuing housing resources, and you've obtained CE consent and done the VI SPDAT. So now you can actually start your progress tracker. So one note here, you will see some additional verbiage in the progress tracker right now that relates to verbal consent. And those things were put in place due to the current COVID crisis, but we're going to do a separate training on all the nuances of the verbal consent, and I'm not going to go through all of that today. Ultimately, the goal is to get written consent, but again, we've made some special provisions due to COVID for verbal consent. So to get to the progress tracker, it's on the client profile tab. It's coming. And here's the progress tracker. So we're going to add. And you complete as much information as what you've gathered to date. Please do not wait until you've got all parts of the phased assessment to start your progress tracker. So that will just slow down the process. The CE matching and referral coordinator doesn't look to actually match your client to any housing resources until a progress tracker has at least been started. So that's important. It's intended to be a place that you can go in and update as you progress through the various pieces of the phase assessment with your client. Again, this should only be started for clients that are literally homeless, where you have CE consent and are interested in being considered for housing interventions. So up here at the top, again, there's some extra verbiage for the verbal consent, but we're not going to go through that. So the entry point progress tracker start date will default to today. You know, it's possible that you can backdate it a little bit, but ideally you're doing this as close to real time as possible. So when you have your written consent, you would indicate the date that you got that consent. You would indicate yes. Once you've got it uploaded, you would indicate yes. There's an entry point start status. This is indicating where the client has been staying right now. Initiating agency is the agency that completed the VI-SPDAT and started the process. It's possible in some cases that the initiating agency will be different than the sending agency. It's a little, I mean, it's not the norm, but it's possible with the walk-in centers. And as we move forward with more relationships with hospitals, you know, it's possible we'll get to a point where someone like that could initiate the process and do that initial assessment, and then someone at a standard, more typical sending agency will pick up the ball and proceed through the rest of the phase assessment with the client. So you'd pick your initiating agency, you as the primary sending agency, and again, enter, you know, the case manager. Whoops. This is contact information so that other agencies, you know, if they've got information or follow-up, they know who to reach. Again, if you find out that someone else is working with the client, this is the spot where that information would be entered. This client is also working with, and you would enter that case manager's information. Then there's a section for the receiving agency, and this would be completed once the client has been referred to a housing opportunity. That gives a spot for the sending agency to know who may be contacting them once the referral's made, you know, from the receiving agency. So that's something that, you know, as a client is working through the process, will get completed later. This part here, part one, part two, part three. The part three is only done for households with minors, but part one and part two should be done for everybody that's entering any of the homeless projects. So all we're doing here is, you know, keeping this in line with, you know, the whole process. So it indicate that you've completed those pieces. For DV, this section here, if you come across, if your client is currently fleeing DV, and you know that probably came out during your safety assessment, your safety screening, then we're asking that you contact one of the DV assessors, and that they would go through the DV assessment tool, as well as talk to them about DV housing resources versus COC housing resources and what that might mean for them. And because the DV assessors are more, they're more attuned to all to everything surrounding DV, we're asking them that they fill out this piece. The needs assessment in chronic homelessness, this first question, this is really the first part of part 4. So this is a document that should be uploaded, and what we're asking for here is the date that you uploaded it. This next question, chronic homelessness and disability information in HMIS is correct and accurately reflects the chronic status. This is not an indication of if you consider this client to be chronic or not. This question is asking, have you verified that HMIS is accurately reflects the client's situation, you know, particularly as it relates to chronicity, which would mean disability. I mean, could be yes or no, and their length of time homeless. The next question, based on HMIS data, does the client meet HUD's definition of chronic? So that's where you would indicate that, yes, I believe this client is chronic, yes or no. I mean, this first question, you know, it should be yes all the time. I mean, you should have gone through and verified that what's in HMIS accurately reflects the client's status. And then the second question is making a determination that you believe them to be chronic or not. This next section has to do with the BI-SPDAT, so the agency that completed it, as well as the score of which BI-SPDAT was completed. Now, I know that this feels like you've entered the BI-SPDAT in 12 places by now. The reason we're asking it for it here is because this progress tracker is visible to the other agencies. So when you have a case where a client is receiving services from multiple agencies, this is an indication, you know, of who did the BI-SPDAT and what their score was, because they may have more information that might, you know, change that score. The next section is about Part 5 and the various pieces of the eligibility. Really, the biggest thing to note here is this homelessness history verification, the date that all documents are uploaded into HMIS. So as you know, if you're trying to document chronicity, there's a multitude of homelessness history tracking, a multitude of various documents that could be necessary to fully document somebody's homelessness. So we're asking that once all of that is gathered and it's complete, then you enter this date. And that everything, and that's also verifying that you've got everything uploaded and attached to the client's record. The rest of this is in line with all the different pieces of the phased assessment of Part 5. And then you get to Part 6. So the thing to note here is on this Part 6B, C, and D, we're not asking for details. This is sections that's asking about, you know, evictions and legal problems and things like that. And we don't really need to publish all of that. We just want to know if you've checked any of those boxes, yes, in one of those 3 pieces of the phase assessment, that you would indicate that here as yes or no. And that just gives the CE team an indication that, you know, something else is going on that may impact their matching, and we should go look at that documentation. The other pieces that are important here for matching are what region the client is willing to consider. Now, this is not a ranking, it's just indicating what regions they may be willing to go to. The type of household, TAY with children, single adults, multiple adults, or a household with minors. And then the number of adults and the number of minors. You know, and those should correlate. If you've selected an adult-only household with more than 1 adult, then the expectation is there should be a number bigger than 1 in the number of adults. If you've selected a TAY with minors, then I would expect to see a number of adults and a number of minors. So these pieces, the region that you're willing to consider, as well as the household composition, are important for matching. It's hard to start the matching process until you know what region and what type of household is looking for that resource. There is a section here for mainstream resources. I mean, the expectation is that anybody who's in the housing process should have a progress tracker. Now, it's completely feasible that you've identified some other resources for this person. And we're not saying that they've necessarily received that, but if you're considering those and have put someone on the wait list for the statewide referral network, for example, we would like that indicated here. That does not mean they're going to be passed over for opportunities as they come up, but it does help. It does help in the matching and referral process. Now, if someone was actually accepted into one of those programs, then we would expect to see the successful placement down here under the status. Then here at the bottom, there's the entry point reason closed. So someone was permanently housed, temporarily housed, they moved away, passed away, institutionalized, or they've gone missing for whatever reason, or they revoked consent. So those are your options there. And then the date. So once someone is actually housed, the expectation is that the receiving agency will come into the tracker and update the tracker with the date they were housed would be the date the tracker should be closed, as well as the fact that they were permanently housed. We would also, if you're not in close contact with the receiving agency, you should be sending that receiving agency case manager a note to say that this person's been housed so that they can close them out of all their homeless projects. The other primary time someone may be closed, their progress tracker will be closed, is if you're exiting someone from your homeless projects due to inactivity, and you're going to close them from the homeless projects, you should also close the tracker. Now, the caveat here is if there's another agency working with that client, so you should check to see if somebody else is listed up here with the sending agencies, then you would not want to close the tracker, but you would want to contact that other sending agency and say, hey, we haven't seen this person for 90 days. We're closing them out of our progress trackers or out of our homeless projects. And if you're still in contact, then you should become the primary sending agency. Okay, the last piece would be all these phased assessment documents need to be uploaded to the client's record that are then shared with the CE team, and then upon referral, they'd be shared with the receiving agency. So that's, again, we did that with the consent, but you continue here and add the additional documents as you gather them. And there is a document on the CE website, which redirects to the Alliance website about naming conventions for all the various pieces of the phase assessment, as well as some explicit instructions on how to do the upload. And again, each document, as you upload it, needs to be unlocked. And here we're just going to be unlocking to the Alliance projects. Oops, misspelled. And then that lock, you can see that lock changes. Okay, that's all I have. Do we have any questions that I can answer now?
I don't see any questions in the question box, but if folks have questions, this would be a good time. So our next module will be module 13.